Rob. Hi, Hannity.
Hello.
And this is Stacy, and there is Jaswinder, who probably will show up. Hello, Jazz. So the idea and the theme and the experiment this time is to speak truth. And I know that people might interpret quite differently what that is. And mostly what I'm talking about is the truth of what we actually perceive and know and what's going on for us in our experience. And yes, I'm gonna mute you for a moment when you're not talking. So the idea is not necessarily your very well researched opinions or facts. It's more like what is actually the experience right now. And one of my references for this is the book Radical Honesty, which is a little bit of a movement. We've had an experiment in the past. Hannah Lee was there for that one, where the idea was to be radically honest. And that had somewhat mixed success in that meeting. Like one of the things that happened then was one of the participants had some strong feedback for one of the other participants. Like that participant interpreted it as, well, whatever you feel like saying is sort of goes under the heading of honesty or truth. And it's not necessarily what we mean. It's more in the direction of your personal truth and being able to reflect on that for yourself. So maybe see yourself a little bit from a distance on what's going on for you, rather than just starting the recording playing of what you think about a bunch of important things. But I mean, the idea is to explore that. So we might do it wrong and then figure out how it works and get a little wiser. Hello, Peter.
Hi there, Fleming. Good
Hi.
to see you.
So we're here with Stacy, Hannah Lee, and Jaswinder.
Everybody.
All right. And I didn't set any particular topic, which doesn't mean there won't be a topic. It just means hi there. It's to encourage finding the topic in the present on what actually is active for us here, rather than something that you've prepared that you already have an opinion about. So the topic could very well be in the direction of what it is to speak the truth, and we can explore the sort of at a meta level what that is.
Actually, I can, being in Aries, with a full moon in Aries, start
Yes.
with my search at the library yesterday for a book I used to have many, many years ago, almost 40 or so, called The Fourth Way by Ouspensky. Does anybody know it?
I haven't read it. I have on my list to study some Ouspensky. Various people have recommended it.
It's about a man named Gurdjieff. But what I got out of the discussions in the book were the concept of the multiplicity of I's. The I am, I want, I need, I have, I see, I can, I can't. And all of these I's are controlled by a master I. And many people meditate trying to get to that master I and meld with it. And we fail miserably, obviously, by our world status. But many of us succeed, and I'm just wondering if anybody has a copy they'd like to send me.
No, I don't have a copy I'd like to send you, but it's interesting what you brought up, and it's kind of in the direction of how I see it. Just like when you're meditating, you're sort of trying to watch what's happening. And it's not that there has to be a judgment about whether it's good or bad. It's just you're there paying attention, you're noting what's happening. There's a thought, there's a feeling. and honestly noting that. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. And that's a little bit like there's an I there somewhere that's conscious about other types of consciousness, which is different from the just one level thing where you're just sort of rattling off the things you have to say. It might be intelligent and conscious, but you might not be in a position of watching what you're doing. So that's, for me, is to some degree the exercise. Cool.
I remember a drawing of something like a pyramid with the multiplicity of eyes, but there's one overseer kind of thing. And then yesterday I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about energy and electricity and the ancient times of the pyramids, wondering what the pyramids are all about and if perhaps there was some kind of battery that could draw energy from the atmosphere and make it useful to the peoples of the day. I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts about the Egyptians and their secret ways and these pyramids and what they might be for, actually, beyond tombs, if that's all they are.
Well, one thing I do know about the Egyptians is they also had some interesting ideas about what the I is or what the soul is, that there were about 8 levels of souls of different kinds, that each person would have a variety of layers, and some people might not be conscious of all of them, or some people might not even have all of them. Like they would consider that people like the pharaoh would be sort of in a special situation to have a more eternal soul, where regular people might have a little bit fewer pieces. But it could also be taken as an exercise to sort of become aware of all of your own levels and parts and soul pieces or eyes. And as you said, we're not always very good at doing that, but it's interesting to explore, I think. Jazz.
Is your third eye open, Fleming? Just question for you. Is your third eye open?
It's third eye open.
No, for Fleming, just Fleming, thank you.
It's a question whether it is. I don't know. I consider it to some degree a metaphor, but I certainly acknowledge that I have perceptions other than the physical ones, that sometimes I know things.
So in close proximity, when you're driving a vehicle at high speed or whatever speed, are you aware of all the movements around you? Are you aware, without looking in a rear view mirror, that there's something happening behind you, but you don't need to look because it's safe? Or that you do need to look and it may not be safe?
To some degree, yeah. Like I personally am a little bit afraid of people who only drive visually, like somebody who actually only drives based on what they can see out of their eyes. Freaks me out my skull, because that's sort of very dangerous. I only really trust people who have some kind of extrasensory perception.
Can't trust anybody. You can only trust your own senses, your onboard senses. When you were a child running around, being chased and chasing, playing tag, you only trusted your own senses. You hadn't even learned about other senses. So that was an awakening of a consciousness that keeps on happening as we get older. But as we get older, we pick up social cues as to, you can't do that, that's not nice, and you mustn't say that, you must always look both ways in the traffic, or you get run over. When we rely on our own senses, we're much better off than listening to other people, and we can do things much faster and much easier. I cross the road, I'm not going to personalize, I'll keep it general. So when you look at the old text and you look at the old third eye being in the middle of the forehead, it's big, they're giving you a clear-cut signal that this person was awake and aware. How to what depth, that would depend on the environment and how well educated they were and what they were doing. And it's not necessary that just because they placed the eye on the pharaoh that the pharaoh was awake. the Pharaoh was supposed to be a god king. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because there was a trial in this country where one of the kings didn't recognize the court trying him and said, I have sovereignty. I am the king. You can't try me. So we have to rely on our own senses and our own perceptions as to whether we're going to believe it or not. That's what I'm complete with that. That's all I have to say. And I really think that, at some time or other, just to finish this off, that we ought to go into some kind of depth as to say what level we are. I only mentioned this because you were talking about meditation earlier. I'm complete.
Thank you, Jazz. Yeah, I think it would be very useful if we could be aware of what level we're at. Not that it has to be hierarchical, but I think a lot of the problems in communication, like in a conversation, particularly in a group, will come from us not being very aware of from what level we're seeing something, or from what perspective, or level somebody else is coming. So we end up in an argument where in some ways we're not talking from the same kind of place. And it's difficult to sort out without starting to judge each other or categorize each other, which can become a little unpleasant. Plus that none of us is a really good authority on who's at what level or something. So for me, it's more of a difficulty, and it's a personal development to try to become more aware of where I'm coming from, or become better at seeing what's going on for somebody else. So we've touched a little bit on it by talking about 4 levels of a conversation, where I've tried to particularly address the level number 4, which is that we together are discovering something, seeing what's trying to come through and come into what's trying to emerge into the future, as opposed to just sort of rattling off our opinions or our well-researched ideas, or as opposed to just interviewing everybody about what they feel about everything, all of which are good in many circumstances. But the main thing is to know which level you're coming from. And my underlying intention is in part to go deeper, both personally and in what we can do in a conversation. So becoming aware of it is valuable. I hesitate with any kind of system that sort of pre-categorizes it as what it is. I know there's third eyes and so forth. There are lots of things, systems that are already there, and chakras and so forth. There's lots of things that I'm sure are there, but we are not necessarily obliged to follow the same system. So I prefer to sort of avoid being too authoritative on how I see it.
I'm reminded of 2 experiences. And maybe others have had these too. I experiment. I'm a risk taker. I've taken LSD. And when your mind is on a drug like LSD, you have abilities that give you a perception beyond the norm. I don't know if anybody would agree with that or has had that experience. It's like when you look at your arm, you can see the blood pulsing through your vessels. I've had the experience of having a person speak to me, and their words came across as geometric patterns flying through the air into my ears. Amazing things. And then I've had an experience in lovemaking, where I became my lover became me. We melded in this energy space that at once had me in this cycle of ecstatic laughter and contentment, to the most inconceivable melding of our spirits, that we were separate and yet we were together. And it was such an interesting experience, both of them, and one with a drug and one with just nothing but the heart space. Just sharing. So what is reality? Where are we going with it? What are we going to do with our planet? And how are we going to get there? Are we going to watch the news and the fires and the pain, or are we going to find a way to make real progress? How can we tap into the creative, the inspired, the dedicated visionary, the archetypical explorer that wants to really heal? I mean, isn't that what this is about? It's about healing for me, our connection, connecting with other people, regardless of distance and space. And what does the planet need more than healing? So how do we do that? What is the mechanism that somebody, some of us, whomever, will devise to tap into something good and great and exceptionally adept at making a difference in people's lives? I pose that question and I have an answer. We need to tap in to creative people's creativity and our own creativity by example. Who is going to teach us? Our parents, our teachers with their preconceived notions? No. It has to come from inside one's self. And each individual will bring their little spark, like a Gurdjieff, like an Ouspensky, like a Edison, like a Asimov, like people who are just free thinkers and tap into something within them to bring forth to the community at large. So what if there were a venue, a network of venue where people like that in our neighborhoods could congregate, and much like the TED Talks, which are kind of one-sided, there's a guy on stage and an audience that just sits and listens or watches. Very few times will there be any participation, but I think the best education comes from doing. And clearly we need to re-educate. We need to re-educate our kids, get them out of the parental and teacher stereotype and get them to really be meditative, insightful, bringing forth their gifts, kind of new individuals. Or as Barbara Marx might suggest, the new humanity, the humanists, whatever she says. She has this nomenclature and words. But anyhow, these venues, creativity cafes, places where people can go anytime, day or night, to give their gifts, to share their gifts, to teach other people some secrets that might empower them. I think that's what's going to make the difference. I don't see any other way than to tap into our populace on the planet that is creative, inspired, that are activists, that want to make a difference, but just don't have the marketing skills or the channels to put their greatness out to the biggest number of people.
Okay.
Now, I want to just plant that seed, and then I want to ask a question. By a raise of hands, does anybody here have an iPhone?
Yeah, but I'd like to talk about what we're doing here. You're sort of taking over the thread a little bit.
Well, I was just wanting to do a little tutorial later. I'm curious if I should even think about it or forget it. So that's all. Okay, if you would like to respond, I'm open to it.
No, I mean, maybe you should later, but I just wanted to give my sort of feeling about like what you just did. Like first you put out a big question that personally made me feel like looking at, okay, what are we doing? And it made me start looking and perceiving and sensing, and I felt good about that. And I started looking for my answers, and I was getting ready to answer that and hearing other people's answers, and I thought that would be fun to explore.
Indeed.
And then you went on into your Creativity Cafe presentation. I think the Creativity Cafe is a wonderful thing, but you sort of went into the answer, the solution. You had the question, which made it then look like it was a rhetorical question that you said in order to then present your proposal, which is a wonderful, maybe it was. I mean, it's not a big problem, but so it became sort of an opportunity to make your presentation. And in many situations, that's perfectly wonderful and what's needed, and somebody might resonate with that, and then we'll go and do it.
I didn't start with that objective, if you let me just state for a minute. I didn't start with the objective of making a point about the venue. It just came to me as I was exploring what's going to make the planet better.
Yeah, and that's quite natural, and that's often what happens, and I'm not necessarily criticizing you for that. I might do that too. I ask a great question that might inspire other people, and then I like go on into answering it myself, and then I get reminded of something else, like what iPhone we're using, and then I have something else. So most of us do that in one way or another. So I'm trying to be conscious of when that serves our group field and when it maybe gets us a little bit off. So like I felt like you presented something that actually this would help channel the group field of looking at big questions of what moves us forward. But then in you answering it and then moving on to another topic, I felt I got a little off. Then I started sort of waiting for you to be done rather than being inspired to do it. So it's just, I wanted to give my feeling of that. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but that was part of my truth where I felt inspired and then I felt a little off afterwards.
Sure, I love the input, agreement, observations.
And that's sort of a side thing on that for me is that I don't always, I mean, in some of these settings, we come out with the best ideas we have. Like, here's like my thing, or here's what my observation. And then we go on for sometimes a little too long and explaining that. And we might not notice whether is that really what moves us forward. So I'm personally looking for something more just looking, perceiving, like we were talking about, more than here's my great idea and you should support it kind of thing.
That's pretty verbose, Fleming, if you don't mind me saying so. I'd like to have some response from people from what I said. And you said your two pieces. What about everybody else? Any agreement, any resonance? Oh, what?
Can I respond?
You're muted.
I'm
Please,
still.
please go on, Stacy. Yes, you're on.
Okay. If I could just say, one of the limitations of this forum is that we weren't all able to experience the energy that everybody else was experiencing. And I think that would have been helpful. I was really drawn into what Peter was saying. In my mind, I started thinking about a lot of people, we start off with that kind of an idea. And I do think that, I think that isolation is a big problem, but I also think that the way we express our creativity is a big problem based on the response we get from other people. So for me, I feel very similar to Peter, I believe, just based on what I'm getting to see of him. And I get really swept up and passionate about something, and I'm feeling really good. And then all of a sudden somebody hits me in the head. This isn't your space. This isn't your time. So I could tell by your expression you get what I'm saying, so I don't have to say any more.
Thank you.
Nice.
What's that sound?
Go ahead, Hanneli. I think somehow when Jess Winter is on at the same time, it gives a Mickey Mouse feedback thing.
Jasmine, you can go ahead.
Well,
Doug, your sound is muted. Your mic is muted. I see you trying to speak, but your mic is.
Hanneli was trying to speak first, but yes, but who gets a weird sound effect? So whoever can.
Thank you.
Annalee, you want to take a shot at it now?
Where I'm at is what I'll share about is to stay present to whatever emerges. And sometimes I would be triggered by something in the group, especially in the last couple of weeks. And it is to then get back into my body and to ask myself, why am I triggered? That's where I'm at the moment. So when anybody shares, it's kind of an interesting space for me because I really go into a sensory experience rather than a listening with the ears experience. And then the normal judgmental stuff or comparison stuff disappear for me. And it's interesting to see if I can hold my own energy, not the space of the group, but my own energy, to be able to hear what I really need to hear in terms of what anybody else share and whatever is emerging. And that's quite an interesting space to be at because it's kind of, it's not a paradox, but it also is a sense there's something bigger going on which I cannot comprehend yet. And that's simply where I am.
Jaswinder, would you want to give it another try? It sounds very funny, but you speak at 10 times normal speed, and that's probably not what you mean to do. It's like a Mickey Mouse movie. I don't know. It's not working right now.
Never heard that
It's very
before.
funny.
Wow. Is it something with his browser? What do you think it is?
It can happen with Zoom sometimes. Jazz, if you leave and come back, you'll probably get a clean link.
Maybe it's reverse speech. He's speaking backwards, and the truth is coming out.
And as if we can hear it.
The truth was said very quickly and backwards, so we didn't catch it.
But it does break the energy, you know, it makes it lighter. And I think for me, it's also the seriousness sometimes takes away the generativity of the conversation. You just relax more into it. But it's just for me personally, I don't speak on behalf of others.
There's been a sort of a recurring theme, and this is in 2 or 3 different conversational communities, contexts, and whatever, that there's sort of a fundamental difference between a feminine energy and a masculine energy in conversation. And there's this tendency for the masculine to rear its head in the form of engineering and projects and things and fixing stuff and modeling stuff and coding stuff and whatever. And the feminine energy is more about fully embodied feeling into to the emergent. And so, you know, in one share, you know, there was this massive flood. And so all the men went to sit down and plan how to respond to the emergency conditions. And we're sitting there planning away while the women got off their asses and started gathering clothes and gathering food and setting up temporary shelters and whatever, and sort of dealing with problems and figuring and fixing things as they came up. And I think there's a dynamic in conversation that there's sort of a sweet spot of between sensing, feeling, presencing, and projecting a communication out, at, as opposed to into or with. And sort of that masculine style in its pure form has the ability, I think it has the ability to sort of kill connection, almost like bug spray. that as fast as somebody goes into that style of communication, that literally everybody goes numb and everybody goes blank. And except for there's always somebody who comes from the same church, as it were, for whom it's music to their ears, and they like, yes, and they get on that bandwagon and off to the races. But it's I think it's a real art and practice challenge kind of thing to balance those two and still be able to share and progress an inquiry or a collaboration or, you know, generative design of something together collaboratively that's specific to a problem or a situation or a subject matter or content. That it is a practice that isn't part of our cultural frame, because our cultural frame has the clock running the show. And so we got to get it done. We got to get it built. We got to get on with the solution. We got to fix it. And there isn't a lot of time for the human beings involved to do that from a present embodied place, if that makes any sense. And so spending 35 hours a week in conversation spaces like this,
Wow.
I'm beginning to have more sort of my curiosity, interest in the practice in terms of how do we do this better? How do we do us better in this, in service to actually saving our collective asses? Because we're going to go extinct if we don't figure out how to talk to each other more productively anyway. And also providing the space in the room for the feminine to contribute, because my experience also is that the circles that are devoted to building things and fixing things and designing things end up being all male really quickly. And it's because the women are smart enough to know that there's nothing to connect into there. It's like, why would I waste my time? It's like, there couldn't be a less satisfying experience than three engineers talking about code and architecture of platforms and stuff. So, so anyway, I'm complete. I'll stop there. But I just wanted to share that because this is not an unusual challenge.
So
Hey Doug, where do you reside? Where's your physical location?
Well, I'm currently in Kingston, New York, which is upstate New York.
I had a feeling.
And yeah, I attended a wedding in a barn like three and a half, 4 weeks ago. It was so freaking insane and ill-conceived. I can't imagine what would induce somebody to pay that kind of money for an uninsulated, drafty barn on a day where the temperatures were sub-zero and there was no heat and there were hail warnings and there were tornado sirens over the ceremony. And I've been frozen ever since. I can't seem to get warm. The food literally left the serving, lines. By the time you got to your table, it was warm. By the time the fork hit your mouth, it was cold. It was the most horrible experience of my life. And so hence the hat and
that explains the hat.
Yeah.
And the sniffles. I just got over a cold, and I'd like to be in touch with you. If you could put a link in the chat with your email or something. Thanks.
So I would like to, agree with and address what Doug said there, and maybe explore with how we can do it better. Like I find myself, I don't know if it's because I'm more aligned with the feminine aspect or what, but I find myself sort of a little irritated with when the thing happens that somebody comes out with a male perspective. Here, I have this idea, this question, it's all organized, there's a project, here's why you should join it. There you go, and it goes on for a while. So I might lean in the direction of looking like I'm just trying to shut people up, which is not necessarily what I want to do. but I would like to find how to accommodate all those different perspectives. Because, I mean, I don't think we're just here to sit and be really touchy-feely about everything. I mean, if we have some things problems to solve and possible solutions and resources and things we can do, we somehow, it would be nice if we could figure out how to plug some things together and make some of those things happen. I just personally don't necessarily think the best way is for each of us to sort of compete about, here's my project, here's why we should do it, and somebody else goes, well, I have this idea. That often becomes also a waste of time as far as I'm concerned, even if everybody's ideas are very well founded. So I'm trying sort of slowly, calmly to look for possible ways of doing it better, like Doc suggests.
The ideas are an excellent object and objectives. The current socio-economic political situation is horrendously bad. We've slipped on the intellectual level, the intelligence level, by a huge margin from about an education and intellectual level of about 130. We've slipped down to about 80, just above average in that area where governance is taking place. And those people, very nice as they are very hard to convince other than showing them hard cash. If this persists, which hopefully it may not, looking at the midterm elections in the USA, and we're going to be having some elections here soon as well in the UK, we may progress and we may actually start putting some of those ideas into practice, actually build the huge machines and try and do the things that are needed to reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere and the methane and produce less meat, and eat more vegetables, etc. Clean up the oceans, stop producing plastic at billions of tons every year just because it's dirt cheap. We don't know what to do with the rest of that oil. If we don't do those things, then we're going to be going into the sacrifice principle. I'm going to assume we're all familiar with the sacrifice principle. I'll give you an example. There's a shark in the ocean. It's there every day. Well, it's not bothering anybody. Leave it alone. Everything's fine. The people are coming and business as usual. Then one day a child disappears. And there's a big hue and cry. Fortunately, the child was found by the end of the day or in the morning for whatever reason. But, and on another day, a child or an adult was actually eaten. Till that happened, nobody had even thought about going out to hunt that shark. So we may have to sacrifice a city or 2 or 4 or 10 or whatever, or an entire coastline, or it may even be that it happens out in Indonesia. Well, it's mainly Indians and Muslims and things, or even Japan. Half of Japan disappears. Well, the Japanese. But when it happens over on the East Coast, that's where Doug is, or on the West Coast, California disappears. One of the richest, if not the richest state in the USA, then maybe our ass will be on fire and we'll do something. So reality is something totally different to what we're presented with in everyday news bulletins and upmanships. And we've got how many nuclear powered and conventional powered aircraft carriers does the US have currently? I know they've got 3 or 4 fleets, and each fleet has to have 2 carriers operational all the time. So it could be as much as over a dozen rotating. And they've got to have maritime assistance supplying them all the time. Because once they're out on site, they stay there for months. So you've got same number of maritime fleets going in and out. There's a lot of things we need to look at. I'm complete.
So now, again, I'm sort of giving my emotional response to that. I don't know what to do with that. Like what you just said, Jess Winter, all seemed very coherent and well researched, and probably some things that needed to be taken care of or brought up. But at the same time, I feel sort of that we're in a conversation where we each just sort of say something different, and now it's somebody else's turn, and now Peter can tell us about different types of iPhones. I mean, I'm not necessarily knocking it. I'm just trying to find a way for conversations to work well. Otherwise, I mean, the more people we are, each of us can start standing up and say, well, the forest, we got to do something about the forest, and it's probably right, and it's important, and you have facts and reasons. Does that move our conversation forward? I don't necessarily know. I think all of these things need to have a space and an outlet and a way of moving forward. But the problem is how we converse about it. Jess Winter.
We don't have a common base. We don't have a common knowledge base at all. Until we get to that stage, this is what's going to happen.
I think you agree, which brings up sort of Heiner, who has come here a lot, is often talking about the frames of how do we even know where it fits in our overall frame. We don't have that. So often it becomes that we compete to like raise our issue and gain some resonance for that. I don't have the answer either.
I think ideally the point of our presence on the planet is to contribute, to be of service, to make things better for somebody else as an objective. And with everybody having that kind of thought process or a motivation in their interactions, I think we can find that things will improve rapidly if the majority will be of service like
that. I second that. I'm of the firm belief that I put faith and trust in our species, and there are enough of us everywhere that bottom up one at a time in small groups and gatherings and conversations just like this one, which are happening all over the world, that we're capable of providing our own deliverance. And that a lot of the bigger, archaic, industrial artifacts that we're staring at now that are completely insane are going to collapse of their own weight through obsolescence as people bottom up start to figure it out and solve their own problems, connect to each other, and communicate. And so that service idea is near and dear to my heart, like that. And there's a piece of the puzzle to that I would add, which is, I don't know, about 3 years ago, I made a very conscious choice and decision to not make that transactional. That there's no quid pro quo for my contribution or value. And if I just focus on paying attention to maximizing my time and attention as value add to people and situations, places, communities, projects, without regard for how value flows back to me, I feel a hell of a lot better. and I spend my time much more productively and much more valuably contributing. And we do have to survive. So people come back with, so you have to eat, you have to pay the electric bill. Like, what about that? And my answer is, it's my responsibility to set up the channel for people to flow not compensation, but money to me as a value of a whole bunch of values that I receive every day. I have to set up a mechanism and way for people to do that. But I don't have to link that to my contribution or value offer. And what started to happen the minute I made that commitment and started living it was that spontaneously in various contexts for an array of reasons, some explicable and some not, people would go, how do I send you some money? And my needs are really modest. So it doesn't take many people that I connect or touch or that are touched or affected by my contribution to feel that urge and to send me something. And so far, so good. I ain't getting rich or driving any Lamborghinis or buying any big houses anytime soon. But I'm fed, I'm warm to a point, I'm clothed, my needs are covered. And I sort of figure that's, I'm living the dream. and I'll stop there.
I'm reminded of a book by Catherine Ponder called The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity.
Cool. And Stacy, you wanted to go? You're muted.
So I just want to add, I agree with both Peter and Doug, but I want to just add to that and say, I think what I see is that part of the challenge we face is that too often we're looking to jump to that big impact rather than focusing on what's right here in front of us, like what happens in this group, which I think is a really positive thing. And if you think about like casting a fishing line so far out, how many other fishing lines you're going to be snagged with. And again, we live in a world where bigger is supposedly better. And we forget these little baby steps that are so important and so valuable. And so I think that's part of what my core message is. Like, I spend a lot of time on Facebook, different political conversations, a lot of private groups with all different kinds of people. And I sort of have to blend in to whatever the energy of that group is. And I'm enjoying it. To me, Facebook is my laboratory. That being said, people are fighting about stuff that doesn't even affect them on a daily basis. And they're fighting over somebody's opinion and why you should hate that person because they had an opinion on somebody else. So that was the first point I wanted to make, is to come back to be what actually is affecting us here and now on an individual basis. The other thing I wanted to add is, so when I hear how Doug has decided to take his challenge, there are going to be pieces of that I'm going to use and pieces of that aren't going to work for me. And I think the other problem we face is trying to get everybody to do it exactly our way, instead of seeing our way as being like a merry-go-round with lots of gifts on it. And everybody gets to pull off their gift as the merry-go-round is going. And so again, for me, it's a valuing of individuality. And instead of feeling, I think sometimes we feel challenged by it. And that this is just a guess, that may come from our own insecurity of, it makes us feel a little better to know, oh, they think that also. So I must be on the right track. So again, it all goes to the inner work. And what Jazz was saying, like, we have to trust ourselves. But at the same time, we have to recognize that my programming is going to be different than everybody else's programming. And somebody else might not be following the rules the way I'm programmed to, but they're not supposed to be. And I have to stop judging that and just do exactly what Doug said, get involved with where I feel involved to be, but not necessarily make judgments that somebody else isn't doing the same thing.
I wanted to find a way to contribute to my community. I'm here kind of in isolation. So I went to Tenafly High School to see if they had a 3D printing program, because I love designing in 3D, to see if they had any maker kind of space where people could tinker with electronics and things like that, because I like to dabble in that. And they were so closed off to outside community input, there was no way in. I was almost escorted out of the building, and they said, "How did you get in here? We have to lock the door, you came in." So much for my attempt to communicate and contribute.
To me, it's sort of both a meta problem. It's a problem for the whole world, and it's a problem for a small group like this. And how do we talk? How do we bring up what we want and what's there, and how do we connect these things together without ending up either wasting each other's time, or pushing too hard, or giving up, or just making a lot of noise? Because the same little issues we have here are what applies to the whole world. Like, I mean, in my vision, the whole world would work if we could just both talk to each other reasonably and directly and honestly, and show our cards, show what we have, what we can do, and connect that up with where the needs are and with the other resources. So if that could be networked, I mean, there's no problem in the world that we couldn't work out. But we have a hard time just talking and how to connect these things together without all that noise. But the exploration is certainly worth it.
I think we also have to be more clear on, are we focused on what it is we want to give, or are we focused on what somebody needs? And both are important, but sometimes we're too focused on, this is what I have to give, this is what I want to give you, but you don't want what I have to give, and that's okay. And I think that we just have to learn how to let that flow so that we meet up with where we're supposed to be.
I just want to come back to something Stacy said, which resonated with me quite deeply in her conversation. And that was that she's doing a social experiment on Facebook.
Yeah, I like that too.
Now, one of the things about changing anything, changing attitudes, is the language that is being used in the everyday usage of whichever community we're in. And that generally involves engaging in the discussions and quite possibly the arguments as well. And they can get quite passionate and even quite warmed up, but never give up. You can always back off, cool off. One of the things I've noticed is that I was a latecomer to Facebook. I belong to, or I'm a board member of a thing called Interfaith Wolverhampton, whereby we have conversations that we believe that other people of faith are not having, and we try and broker that people have these conversations by arranging meetings. And I went on Facebook just to see what was happening, and I was quite pleasantly surprised X number of years ago, and I engaged at all levels. And as we went forward, it sort of started clicking that over the period of years, and we had memes come in and all sorts of new words coming, that the word usage was changing a lot faster with social media than it had done ever before. And what with the smartphones, the social behavior patterns are changing extremely fast. And we've got groups of opinions saying various things as to what it's doing to our youngsters. And I'm thinking, this is wonderful. We're exhausting so many subjects at such a high rate of exhaustion. We're moving forward, and people are now actually starting to become more free with their thoughts, and their conversation levels are increasing. How come there's so much bitching going on? That's because people have their own little opinions. That, like when we were younger, we used to sit in front of the box. You got square eyes. No, we didn't get square eyes. And I get people saying, the brain's going to get damaged with all that Wi-Fi going through your brain. Well, I'm still talking, and it hasn't fried my brain, although I've cut down on the usage of smartphones. So what am I getting at is that when social change or when other changes happen, and we are part of that, and I'm glad to say we are part of that, because we go out and we engage, and then we move around and come back, and we tend to use what we gain from one group and take it to another group and vice versa. So, but actually engaging at an extremely high level, which I'm trying to do, is to actually engage with the decision makers. In this case, it would be the members of parliament and the members of the select committee that actually forms the government. And I do write letters to them occasionally, and I get a reply. And I get the usual jargon, nothing much is going to happen. In a roundabout way, that certain aspects of our behavior has changed tremendously. Some of the arguments that were being put forward 10, 12 years ago when I joined with Facebook, because they were answered in rapid staccato, they don't come up anymore. They might in private conversation, but on Facebook, everybody seems to be up to speed. Maybe, just maybe, I'm willing to give Stacey the benefit of the doubt on this one. We might actually achieve something in the next year or two, but I'm still looking at the long-term implications that we're going to have to probably go to the sacrifice of something or other before we move our collective industrial power and actually start reducing CO2. It's probably looking that way increasingly to me. I'm complete.
Part of what works for me about something like Facebook is that I can be informed about many, many different things very quickly, very efficiently by skimming over the stream that flows. I can see what hundreds of people are doing, what they're up to, without getting stuck in it unless I want to. It all goes by and I can be informed about it. So it's not so good for actually doing something about it or going in depth, but it's very good for staying informed about what is out there. So if I really want to connect with it, I know where to find it. So that's as opposed to, for example, a phone call, which I nowadays mostly hate getting a phone call. So if somebody calls me on the phone, I am hostage to whatever they want to talk about. I have to stay until I find a way of getting off. It might also be a good phone call, but a lot of the time they have something in mind that they want to push on me or ask me about or get from me, and I cannot just get away from it. So as compared with that, Facebook is heaven. I don't have to engage with anything I don't feel like. I can just scan over it and then go and do something else and get back to it tomorrow. So I'm looking for that in some areas, even in a conversation like this. Sometimes a conversation like this becomes like a phone call. I'm stuck with this person who's telling me something. Sometimes it's like Facebook, where there's this, there's that, and okay. I hear what each person is doing, where they're at, and I can take it or leave it. That's great. I mean, none of them are perfect. Neither the Facebook or a personal phone call necessarily solves the big problems in the world. In between, we need to find some way of actually taking it somewhere as well. But just wanted to see how I see the parallels between conversations and Facebook and phone calls and so forth. Hanneli?
I love what's emerging because what came up for me as you all were sharing was when you said, Flammy, you wanted to go to the level where something gets, a more generative space where we actually do something. And it actually came up now a few times in terms of Facebook and you speaking about your phone call. But if I take it back to when we started off today, where Peter was sharing about the third eye and that high vision. And this is it's not to say this is the only way, but for me what came up as you were sharing that and through the whole conversation, putting it now all together, is we lose the thread. We jump to other stuff. If we can, like on Facebook, when there's a thread, we all start, if it's interesting, we start engaging. and we add our opinions, our views, our insight, whatever it might be, but it's still one thread of consciousness, regardless of the versatility of all the input. Now, in a conversation like this, if, like when something turns up, like Peter started with that high vision in terms of the third eye, of what's then taking onto it to the personal level, but it's the same thread to start latching onto that. But now it's just, we're all human. We jump from one thing to the other. So we lose the thread of the energy, and what can emerge where everybody's contributions can actually slot into the stream. I think that could be very valuable to experiment with that. Whoever, it's not about who's important, who's not, or whose vision or projects more important than the other. It's simply then to merge the two, the one that came about and each one's their part in it. So whatever it might be, like for Peter, he's created cafes, whoever, and then to see where that thread, but it's still the same thread we're building on, where everybody's contribution is actually making the thread stronger. Just what came up for.
I just want to say I love that, and it's to a large degree what I'm looking for. That, I mean, there are no wrong topics here. There's nothing you shouldn't bring up. There's nothing you can't say. So it's more, how can we accomplish that both we feel free to say what we need to say, and somehow it weaves together in a common thread, so that we feel that every piece that brought up, it somehow is part of that tapestry, and it actually takes us somewhere. Yeah, I don't have an answer to how exactly we do that, but as a vision, I love it, and that's what I'm hoping that we will do more of. We've reached the top of the hour, so maybe a little bit of quick feedback. How did this work as an experiment for you guys?
Oh, we didn't actually get around to talking about how to be truthful. To be truthful, I had no intention of being truthful. I'm complete.
For me, it was quite a heart opening. No need to give reasons for it, but it was quite heart opening.
I'm always glad you're doing this, Fleming. Thanks for holding the fort.
Well, you're here doing it with me. Well, I found this a little difficult, but useful. I sort of feel like we got somewhere in some fashion.
Yeah,
I had 2 cents about the iPhone. You brought it up again, so I'll go through with it. In settings, you can go down to general and then go down to keyboard, and then there's a thing called text replacement. I depend so much on text replacement for compressing my time. I no longer have to type my email. I no longer have to type my address. I punch 3 characters and it all spits out in whatever medium I'm accessing with the phone. So it's a great macro utility built into the phone. And I try to do more with less, to quote Buckminster Fuller. So that really helps me, these text replacement aspect of your iPhone. If you have one, check it out. That's my piece.
It would be great if we could have conversations like that. We just sort of start saying something in a general direction, and then the rest sort of gets filled in, and it becomes a wonderful conversation. No,
maybe we'll develop a shorthand if we stay together long enough. And we can do that.
Good. Well, thank you for that tip. Any other final remark? Otherwise, Stacy, there you go.
I just want to say I'm really grateful for having found my way here. And as far as speaking truth, I mean, just me being able to say everything I said, that was me speaking truth. So, you know, and again, I just like being able to connect with people that, for the most part, we all want this. We want to move in the same direction. Let's just say it that way. Well, maybe we'll go in circles. I don't know.
Maybe we want to get on the merry-go-round. No, it's all useful images. I think we more or less are wanting to go in the same general direction. So thank you all for showing up here, being part of Speaking Your Truth. It's been lovely. See you again some other time for some other kind of experiment. Take care. Have a good day.